people go through dark times, and it often feels like there's no light or hope in sight. But sometimes a spiritual connection or even a supportive presence is what we need to help us get through. We have that here today. Welcome to Celebrate Michigan, the show produced on the campus of Medina University. I'm Chris Benson, and with me today is Marianne Burnett. She's the manager of spiritual care at the Michigan Metro region of Ascension. Marianne, we're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's a privilege. Thanks for having me.
So talk to us. What is chaplaincy? I have a feeling there might be people who watched that intro and they thought, I don't know what that is. So tell us about it.
Sure. We are spiritual care providers. And when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about a larger than religion thing. Many people think a chaplain is someone who it goes in with a particular religious preference and ministers from that area, or they're a church person who comes in and prays with somebody. But we actually deal with how you find meaning and purpose in what's happening to you. Now, some people find meaning and purpose through religion, but we are trained professionals. We can work in a variety of areas. We can work in a hospital, which is what I'm trained for, and a lot of what I'll talk about is my training and experience as a hospital, as a healthcare chaplain. So, we deal with people's emotional and spiritual issues and come alongside and companion them through all the things that you just talked about, dark times.
So you mentioned a hospital setting. What might that look like? How might a patient or family member get connected to a chaplain in a hospital?
Well, it kind of depends on where the patient is at the time. Some patients would prefer not to see a chaplain, but there are certain circumstances that a chaplain almost always would be involved. So I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We kind of are with people on the worst day of their life every day of our life, because we go to all of the major emergencies, the traumas, the codes. We are there for pretty much every death that occurs, and with this very seriously ill people. So mostly a nurse will put in a consultation request through our electronic medical record system. Chaplains do chart in the medical record. They are considered part of the interdisciplinary team of professionals. We round with the physicians. We round in specific areas. Chaplaincy now is so broad that you can specialize, and many people have found their niche in behavioral health. Some people find a niche in palliative care. Some people find a niche in trauma. And so we end up rounding with the medical practitioners and sitting with them every day. We are very active in ethics, and that's in every hospital has an ethics team. And so we are also members of that team to help them wade through those waters. So
when I think about the services that chaplain provides, what kind of services are those that they talk about?
Oh, there are just so many, but when it's hard to narrow it down but very often we are called when family is grieving the loss of someone, especially a sudden death. So we are there quite often when it's a lengthy illness and they just need to be comforted. We provide a supportive presence. That's what our real job is, and we're trained listeners. So we listen, and they could be experiencing many things. Fear, they could be anxious, they could just be sad. Again, they could have a behavioral health issue. So very often they want to talk to a chaplain. We deal with spiritual and emotional issues.
You mentioned the word palliative. Mm-hmm. Will you walk that out and explain that a bit more?
Sure. So I'm one of the few people, I'm the only person in Michigan that holds an advanced certification in hospice and palliative care chaplaincy. And palliative care is sort of a broad term. It refers to people who are in any serious illness that might be life-limiting. And so if you have a life-limiting illness, you can come into palliative care anytime during it. So many people think palliative care is like hospice, which is really the last 6 months of life. But palliative care you can come into anytime, and it provides an extra level of support. It deals with symptom management, and you can still be provided curative care, where when you go on hospice, you can't. You have to get rid of all of your curative cares and just focus on comfort. Whereas if you're in palliative care, you can still get all your treatments, but guess what? You get to have a chaplain, a social worker, levels of all kinds of care that really help with the symptom management, because we're looking at quality of life. We want to provide the best quality of life there is.
And I'm curious, how long roughly have chaplains been in place? Have they always been available in places like hospitals?
Oh yeah, it's really funny, because I think the organization that I'm with has been certifying people for, I want to say it's been since the 40s.
Wow.
Yeah, they've been around for a long time. What the issue many people find is that many people think back in the old days, I should say, a lot of chaplains basically were clergy. They were either, very often it was priests and nuns. They were in the hospital and they were seen as the people that could provide the spiritual care. A lot of it was very religious focused. And so, over time, it has turned, the tide has turned, and anybody can be a chaplain that really feels a calling for that type of work. And so now it's, the sky's the limit on what people want to do. And chaplains are involved in so many different areas. They're involved in research. I published an article in the Journal of Maternal, Fetal, and Neonatal Medicine with several doctors. There's just so many things that we can do now that probably wasn't thought of. Everybody thought you had to be clergy in order to get to be a chaplain, but you don't. Anybody can do it. And that's in any religion too.
And it sounds like there's many different branches or areas of it, like specializations, because like, as you mentioned, in a hospital, you may have working with babies, or persons at the other end of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah, and right now I am part of the neonatal intensive care unit team, but mostly I work with palliative care in the neonatal intensive care team, which is kind of sad, and I don't want to bum anybody out or make people feel sad, but it is a real thing, and it happens every day. People have babies that don't have great outcomes, and when we expect that they're not going to have a very long life. So we have palliative care specialists actually geared for infants, for newborns.
Well, and I'm sure that the people who experience that care are so grateful for that.
They are.
And so we are already at the break. It went by so fast. Please stay with us. We'll be right back, and we'll talk more about Marianne's experience and how she became a chaplain. Stay tuned.
I think my purse is upstairs on the bed. It's not here. Check the dining room. No. What about your sister's room? It's not there either. The upstairs closet? The downstairs closet?
There are no more closets.
Moms everywhere are finding ways to keep kids active and healthy. Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov.
Do you like this top? It's so gay. Really? Yeah, it's totally gay.
You really shouldn't say that.
Say what?
Well, say that something's gay when you mean it's bad. It's insulting. What if every time something was bad, everybody said, "Oh, that's so girl wearing a skirt as a top"?
Oh, you are.
Those are cute jeans, though. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
Learning how to kickflip 6 stairs takes determination. So will getting into college. I've got what it takes. So do you.
You realize that 49 million Americans struggle with hunger? That's 1 out of every 6 Americans. These people are around us every day. They're our friends, they're our coworkers, their kids go to school with our kids. Sometimes we're not even aware that they're struggling. This problem is closer than you think. So is the solution.
play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
Michigan. I'm Chris Benson, and today again I'm here with Marianne Burnett, and we're talking about chaplaincy. And you may not have heard of it, but I know after this show you're going to know exactly what it is and probably be interested in it even more. Marianne, how did you get involved in this area or this line of, I say work, but I have a feeling it probably would be more apt to say it's a vocation or a calling.
Well, it's definitely a calling. You do have to be called to this. I think I've always had a servant's heart. When I was a teenager, I volunteered for 3 years at the VA hospital that was here in Allen Park, Michigan. I really felt that I wanted to be in a helping profession. So I became a medical assistant, and I did that for close to 20 years. I worked at the local hospital, the one that I was employed with for a number of years, as a chaplain as well. I worked in internal medicine, high risk OB. I worked in a lot of places like that. Then I went to work in the church. I was called by a pastor who said, come work in the church, I need an administrator. And so I did that. And through that, I started doing some visits to some homebound folks. And I just fell in love with it. And I said, there's this thing called chaplaincy. Let me take a look into it. I did not know at the time what that would mean for me education-wise. So just to let you know, in order to be a professional chaplain, you have to have the minimum of a master's degree. And then you have to do, along with the master's degree, you have to do a minimum, it's almost 2 years of what they call clinical pastoral education. And then you do probably another 1.5 years of writing, and you can become board certified, which most hospitals now are requiring board certification. Sure. And then after that, I, of course, glutton for punishment, went further and did the advanced certification in hospice and palliative care. There's a book, I think by Eugene Peterson, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction.
Oh, what a neat title. Say that again. A
Long Obedience in the Same Direction.
Oh, that's neat.
And so part of, this training that we do, we want to make sure that we don't bring our own issues into the room. We leave who we are at the door, and we meet people where they are, no matter what that is. We see patients in all kinds of stages of their life, every religion. We don't just see one religion, we see everybody. And so we are also cultural brokers. We train a lot in culture, but this clinical pastoral education is almost 2 years worth of being in the hospital. You are seeing patients every day, getting used to what it's like, probably 20 to 40 hours a week, depending on the program that you're in. And then you spend another 8 hours in that week with your peers where they critique everything that you did. You write verbatims, you go through them, and your classmates or your peers critique this group. And it's usually, 5, 6 people in a group. And every week you go through, they basically try to find out what pushes your buttons. You have to really come in contact with your feelings. But also, we minister, for lack of a better word, to people based on our own hurt. So many of us come to this work we all do. We're all wounded healers, right? Sure. So we come to this work with this woundedness, and that helps us to better empathize with others. And like I said, we learn how to leave our own stuff at the door. And so I just started that journey. It was a pretty long journey, I would say 2001 to 2014. And that's how long it took me, because I was working and, I was a single mom at the time, so I was really, it was tough.
And it sounds like what comes through is that you have such a sense of yourself, and I have a feeling you know yourself so much better than you did all that time ago when you started.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that would be so necessary, and I can tell you take great responsibility for what you bring into the room when people are in such a vulnerable state. And I think the point you made about, when you're in these kind of service jobs, we have to really think about what am I hope I'm not projecting on the person I'm with.
And that would be very easy to do. We try not to ever share our own, self-disclosing comments, but I like to say, whatever you went through before you got to this room, it could have been a traffic jam, your babysitter didn't show up, whatever it was, you've got to flip the switch before you walk in the room so you can be really present for that patient. Because whatever you give to them, I have found out in my career, they will give right back to you. And if it might be, I don't want to talk to you. I can tell you're emitting some kind of bad mojo, and so I really try to get people to leave everything at the door and meet the patient where they're at.
And you mentioned hospital settings. Are there other settings that chaplains are involved in as well?
Sure, in the criminal justice world, some chaplains go into work in that area. Hospices, they employ chaplains. The credentials for being a hospice chaplain are a little bit less, but still much of the same. So everybody has their own place. I was very comfortable in a healthcare setting. And I went right back to this hospital that I had worked in for years. I grew up in that neighborhood. Many of my friends were there. So it was just natural for me to go into a place that I was very familiar with and to do my work there.
And it sounds like you felt like you had built a foundation of knowledge, so then you came in at a different level and were able to help people in a different way.
Yes, absolutely.
And I love that you talked about the whole care team, and the approach now to healing isn't just the body, it's the mind, it's the spirit, it's the soul.
Completely, we are holistic in everything we do. We deal with the entire person. And so that's, spirit, mind, body. And I don't know if I said this before, but people are, they're hurting. And they're hurting outside of that hospital. They come in the hospital and everything exacerbates. It becomes a lot worse. So I walk in a room, I don't know how many times I'll walk in a room and somebody will tell me, my brother just died last week, this happened. And it's not that grief makes them so sick. It's that they already had something and it just got much worse. And so they end up in the hospital, correct.
Well, we're already at another short break. Stay with us and you stay with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about how COVID impacted chaplaincy and all of our lives. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Check out this chef, right? Right? That's so gay. That's really gay. Dude, look at those pants.
Please don't say that.
What?
Don't say that something is gay when you mean that something is dumb or stupid. It's insulting. It's like if I thought this pepper shaker was stupid and I said, man, this pepper shaker is so 16-year-old boy with a cheesy mustache. Just saying. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
My name's Reggie. Just recently, my wife and I took in her sister's children. Now, we already had 4, so I went from becoming a family man to a man with a bigger family. Now, you can't eat love, so I don't know how I'm gonna feed them tonight. How was that, Rich?
I think I look more like Denzel.
That's cold, man.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
back to Celebrate Michigan. I'm Chris Benson. We're in the studio with Marianne Burnett, and we've been talking about chaplaincy. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how COVID impacted that. You know, throughout our show all season, we're in COVID now. I mean, it's not done. It's not done with us for sure.
Nope.
And we've all been impacted so much by it over these years. How did it affect you and the work that you do?
You know, I'm okay, but it has been very traumatizing for many, many people. When I first walked into the ICU at the very beginning, when everything was chaos and we didn't know really what this thing was, we didn't know how much, protection, PPE was out there. So chaplains were kind of told, don't wear a mask until, we were all walking around without masks unless you were actually in the hospital. Well, then they changed and said, no, now you got to wear masks. But chaplains didn't want to use the PPE because didn't want to take it away from somebody who needed to be in that room. But when I first walked in the ICU, I looked at this. In all my years in medical work, I had never seen anything like this in my life. I mean, it was unbelievable, and it didn't look real almost, with the gowns hanging outside rooms and these, things outside rooms to throw all the gowns and everything in. Many of the nurses took the stands with all the stuff out in the hallway to monitor because they didn't want to keep going in and out of these. We just did not know. People were dying at such a fast rate. So, of course, no visitors were there. So there was a great deal of moral distress for nursing staff. Chaplains did a lot of phone calling to families. A lot of times the staff didn't have time to call families, and so that may be the only call they got that day was, hey, I was by the room. I didn't go in today, but this is what happened. I did a lot of holding of
Cell phones?
iPads.
Oh,
the
yeah.
iPad thing, and you're seeing this poor family crying over here, and the patient is so sick. But I did a ton of phone calling, and we really shifted our focus in many ways to deal mostly with the family in their homes, and because the patients couldn't talk. You could even try to call the patient on the phone and they couldn't breathe. I'd be trying to talk to them. So, but mostly take care of staff. So our focus really changed to help debrief staff and come alongside them because they struggled. They had to be away from their families. I've done several groups in the hospital setting where we've talked through some of this. So it was traumatic. I think it was and I think some people are still struggling quite a bit with all of that because it just seemed like it never went away. Of course, now we're in a good place for right now, and I'm happy about that. And but yeah, it's been rough.
I imagine, and having you describe that with such rich description of like what it was like to be there just really affected me now when you were doing that, and just thinking of what that must have looked like from your perspective of, my role is typically to be here to comfort family. There's no family here. I'm being called on to do that in an electronic format where I imagine there's a real presence that you enjoy being in people's presence, and you actually probably use that to understand the emotions that are happening.
Right.
So I'm sure that affected, and you had to know how to do that very quickly. You didn't really have any
there
time
was no
to prepare.
time. Right. And we were all just, to be honest, everybody was just scared. We were just all running around scared. What is this? Is this the end of the world now? What is happening? But soon you kind of get in the groove, things get better. I think I was one of the first people to get in line for the vaccine, and we had a great, I work with a great team, and so I was very proud of everybody.
Where did you find the strength to be able to minister and do your work without any warning and in that way? Where do you attribute that to?
I think a lot of it is maturity and my own faith. I relied on my own sense of God, and that really saw me through a lot. And being, now I'm in a Catholic health institution, and so I was able to break away and just go bask in the sanctuary of that building and just spend time in prayer there, because that's who I am. And I think a lot of the other chaplains did that as well as many staff. I mean, if they could get away, they definitely were doing that.
I imagine there's people that are watching the show right now who they're intrigued. They're intrigued by what you're saying, and they're interested, but they're also thinking, she must be some superwoman, because I don't think I could do that. What would you say to people who might be thinking that? They're interested, but they're not sure that they could do this.
You never know until you try something. So there's lots of programs, and many hospitals have volunteer. But now our volunteers were discontinued through all of COVID, but they're bringing them back now.
Okay.
They've been back at some of the local hospitals. I have connections at almost every hospital around, and they're all brought their volunteers. So that's a way to get your feet wet. I mean, that's kind of like what the first unit of CPE is all about, is, because the sights, the sounds, the smells, it's all very different, and you may not realize I'm going to faint if I have to smell that smell one more time. It's that kind of thing. So you do have to get very used to being in a hospital environment. The lingo is different. It's a cultural switch. But for me, I'd been in medicine for so long, I don't know that this really, I've relied on my faith.
And I can tell that you have a wonderful presence, and I know that you are a wonderfully calming presence for the many, I'm sure hundreds of people, probably thousands at this point, that you've comforted. Marianne, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you very much for asking.
And sharing all about chaplaincy. And thank you for coming to Celebrate Michigan and learning about this. We celebrate all the great things happening in the Mitten State, and we're so glad you could join us. We'll see you next time.